Hey everybody, and welcome back to Access Blockbusters Pod. It is so good to have you guys here with me today. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well, and we are back for another episode of the podcast. So excited to have you guys. Unfortunately, I do have to say off the bat that CM will not be joining us for today's episode. We're very sad about that. He may be gone. Maybe today and maybe next week, not entirely sure, but he will definitely be back. For those of you guys who enjoyed him last week, I had a blast with him, and we can't wait to have him back on the podcast. But today, it's just me flying solo, and hopefully you'll stick around for the ride, and we're going to be talking about a lot of exciting things today. It's been a big week for Marvel, if you couldn't tell. There's been a lot of things that have been going on, so without further ado, let's just get a couple housekeeping things out of the way before we get started. First of all, if you haven't noticed, or if you haven't seen the Google form that I've been putting out, I've been linking in the descriptions of all of my videos, then, if you would like the chance to be featured in the podcast, if you would like the chance to have a topic or a question featured on the podcast, and basically how the podcast is going to work is that we have main topics that we discuss for a while, and if there are any questions at the end, we can do a little Q&A as well. And those questions don't have to be related to anything in particular, just anything in the world of anything, really, movies or, random things. And if you would like the chance to have your name shouted out with those questions or topics, then please feel free to fill out the Google form. It helps us shape the podcast in a way that, interests you, because that's really what we're here to do, is to talk about things that you're interested in, as well as things that we're interested in, and have a good time doing that. So again, the Google form, as always, will be linked in the description down below of the YouTube video of this podcast. And by the way, if you prefer to listen to an audio-only version, if you don't want it on YouTube, we are on Spotify. We are also using the platform called Anchor, if you prefer to listen to it there. But yes, we are on Spotify if you just look up Access Blockbusters Pod. We are trying to get on Apple Podcasts. I'm not entirely sure what the deal is with that. We might already be on Apple Podcasts. I'll double check as soon as this podcast is over. But if we're not there, stay tuned. We'll be looking for that. But we should be on most of the major platforms. So that's very exciting for us. And so that's that for the Google form. Second really big piece of housekeeping announcement that I have to make is we are introducing something new for the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, because this is the podcast, but for the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, we are introducing what is called Access Blockbusters Pod Clips, or ABP Clips. And I'm taking a little bit of inspiration from John Campea, if you guys know him. He's pretty big in the YouTube space, and what he does is he does his daily shows, and then he has those 1 or 2 hour long daily John Campea shows posted to YouTube. But he also discusses main topics like we're doing here, and then he posts the little clips of just those topics on the YouTube channel. And I thought, just to be quite frank, to pull the curtain all the way back, not all the way back, but just a little bit. The podcasts obviously don't do as well on the YouTube channel as other videos do, and that's totally understandable. If, somebody doesn't want to click on a 1.5 hour video, that's completely fine, totally understandable. But I do think that some of the things that we talk about on the podcast are things that you would be interested in. And so, today we'll be talking about Suicide Squad, we'll be talking about Black Widow, we'll be talking about Loki, and I thought if you don't want to listen to the podcast, or if you don't want to look at the time codes, and if it's too much of a hassle, no problem at all. We'll be posting all of the individual little segments that we do as different videos, and they'll be, however long we talk about them, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and hopefully, if it'll get more people to listen to the podcast, hopefully in its entirety, which would be awesome. I would really appreciate that. But if not, if you just want to hear me talk about Loki and why maybe I was a little disappointed by it, then you'll just listen to that 20-minute video, and that'll be great as well. It'll help support the channel. We'll be introducing ABP clips. I believe they will be coming out at the exact same time as the actual podcast on YouTube, so stay tuned for that. And that is basically all of the housekeeping items out of the way. Now, not usually, we just started this last week, but with the Google form, you can again submit topics that you want us to talk about, and these topics are usually relevant things that are going on, generally within the last week, although it doesn't have to be, but, if we get a lot of topics, we're going to have to pick and choose more relevant things to talk about. But we would love, to hear what you guys want us to talk about. And so we do have one main topic today. We unfortunately don't have a Q&A part today because nobody sent in questions. Totally fine. But again, feel free to submit stuff for the Google form. And so today's topic comes from Star Wars Galactic, and this is the From the Crew segment. We're going to hear from you guys and what you guys want to talk about. So this is again from Star Wars Galactic. Thank you so much for submitting a topic, and I'm going to read out what he has to say, and we're gonna talk about it. So he says, it was announced recently that the casting details for a new Batgirl film are that Warner Brothers are looking for a new Jim Gordon and a Barbara Gordon / Batgirl. With us having two Jim Gordons, one in the DCEU, DC Extended Universe, and one in the Pattinson universe, wouldn't you say that it's a missed opportunity of not introducing Batgirl into the DCEU with there already being Batman, Ben Affleck, that's been in and hopefully, he says, going to be in a lot of future films in the DC universe? That's the first question. Because it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to do that instead of just starting a new DC universe altogether. And finally, on the subject of this topic, what are you hoping to see from a Batgirl movie? Thank you so much, Star Wars Galactic, for your question and topic. So there is actually a lot to discuss here, and I'm really glad because I think this issue runs just a little deeper than Batgirl and Batman in particular. So we'll break it down. So the first part of the question, so for those of you who don't know, it's been rumored for quite a while now that they being Warner Brothers, has been developing a Batgirl film. It's been in various stages of production, as have been a lot of the DC films, including The Flash. At one point, I do believe Joss Whedon was attached to it. Obviously, after the whole Snyder Cut debacle, I don't think that's the case anymore. But regardless, there were some rumors and rumblings that they're looking for a new Batgirl. And at least I'm not entirely sure if it's going to take place in the DCEU. It could very well. It could be in its own separate thing. But I think, so the first question that Star Wars Galactic is asking here is really, doesn't it make sense just to keep like a Batgirl in the DCEU instead? Like, why are we making a completely separate one when we have, the Ben Affleck universe? And we're hoping that Ben Affleck is going to appear in a lot of the future DCEU films. And I think that's the first part of the question that I take not issue with. It's not your question. Your question was great. I think it's more DC. That part of the question with DC that I take issue with is because, look, it's not any secret that the DCEU in its entirety, starting from Man of Steel, and I believe the last film was, not including the Snyder Cut, was Birds of Prey. The DCEU, just as a whole, as a unit, has been... Oh, I'm sorry, not Birds of Prey, Wonder Woman 1984. But the DCEU as a whole has been... Let's not blunt words. It's been a disaster in terms of, consistency and quality. And I'm not even just talking about continuity. Like, I'm totally fine with making more standalone films. In fact, we're going to talk about Marvel and why, the whole interconnected thing might be getting a little out of hand. So I'm totally fine with them making an Aquaman film that doesn't really connect to Justice League at all, and that's fine. But there has been just this wild varying inconsistency, and these same characters jumping from film to film, being wildly different in each one. Like Harley Quinn started out in Suicide Squad, then she went into Birds of Prey, and then she went into The Suicide Squad. It's like, it's all over the place. So my first thing is that I don't honestly know, first of all, what this Batgirl film is going to be. Is it going to be very closely connected to the Ben Affleck thing, or is it going to be its own separate thing? I think that's the first thing that has to be answered here, right? Is because, look, if you want to make a Batgirl film related to Ben Affleck, then you're clearly going back to the DCEU, and I mean, you can do that, that's totally fine. Or they might just want to be making like a Birds of Prey sort of more standalone film with, a character that's very popular in Batgirl. But the second thing in your question, and the first part of that question, is also an interesting one, and that you say hopefully. So I want to make sure that we understand that Star Wars Galactic is saying hopefully. He's not saying that he being Ben Affleck is going to be in a lot of DCEU films. But I think it's also important to point out that I don't think Ben Affleck is going to be in the DCEU after The Flash. I could be completely wrong. But for those of you who have been following the whole Ben Affleck situation, he started out as, obviously the Batman in Batman v Superman. He went to Justice League. Justice League was a disaster. And at that time, it was reported, hey, Ben Affleck is done after Justice League. Then he kind of went back for some Snyder Cut reshoots, and then he was going to make his own Batman film. Then he stepped off from directing the Batman film, but he was still going to act in it. And then he got Matt Reeves to direct it, and then he stepped out of acting it. So and then obviously later on, he decides to come into the Flash and in whatever capacity. I don't honestly think that the DCEU is going to touch Ben Affleck's Batman for a while after the Flash, and I do think that Michael Keaton will be the primary Bruce Wayne, at least. I don't think Batman. I think Batman, we'll see what they do, but they might just want Batgirl to be the next sort of Batman figure, which I'm not sure how good of an idea that is, because while I enjoyed Ben Affleck's Batman, I think Robert Pattinson's Batman's going to be excellent. I think if you want a DCEU, and especially if you're going to bring in Superman back at some point with Henry Cavill, which I hope, or they're just going to reboot it with the J.J. Abrams one. But I feel like, you would want Batman in some capacity. I'm not saying that you don't want Batgirl because you have a Batman. I'm saying you can have both. But I think it's kind of a stretch to say, and I'm just talking about, business numbers. I'm not talking about representation, because I think it's great if you have a Batgirl and have female representation. But I'm saying that obviously more people would be interested in a Batman film than a Batgirl film, because obviously Batman is one of the most popular comic book characters of all time. Like, Hulk versus like Hulkling, for example. So I just think that we have to kind of figure out where this Batgirl film is in this whole mess of a DCEU right now. Because obviously you have sequels going on, you have Shazam, but then you have the Suicide Squad, which we'll talk about in just a second, which is related to really nothing except having some same characters. So I think that's important to set up first. The second part of your question is, so then Star Wars Galactic says, because it makes a lot of sense in my opinion, to do that. I think that being, having the Batgirl already existing in the DCEU, and then having its own thing. Which again, like I was saying, I think it just depends on what the direction of the DCEU is. It could just be a complete disaster for all we know. Not the Batgirl film, but the DCEU's direction. But then he says, and then finally, what are you hoping to see from Batgirl film? That's a really interesting question. I have had very limited exposure to the Barbara Gordon character. I do know a little bit about her. I have read a little bit of The Killing Joke. But I am not entirely as familiar with her character as, let's just say, obviously Batman. And by the way, on the subject of a Barbara Gordon, we talked about Jim Gordon, right? I don't think it's safe to say even that J.K. Simmons is ever coming back as Jim Gordon in the DCEU. To be fair. So, Star Wars Galactic was saying, well, we have a Jim Gordon here, but then we have a Jeffrey Wright there. And, Jeffrey Wright, J.K. Simmons. I don't even know if J.K. Simmons is going to come back in a Batgirl film, or if they're going to cast a completely different Jim Gordon and all that sort of stuff. So it's just a lot of moving pieces. I will say this. In a Batgirl film, and me not being a super close comic book reader, although I'm a huge fan of obviously the material that's come out of the comic books with the movies and the television shows and all that sort of stuff, I am not entirely familiar with what defines Barbara Gordon as Batgirl. We know that Batman is defined in most things as, not killing, and, in most things, and a vigilante. Bruce Wayne, obviously rich billionaire who works in the Batcave and all that sort of stuff. I am not entirely sure what the defining characteristic of a Barbara Gordon film is. So to be quite honest with you, I'm not expecting anything. And I think for me, as an audience member, as a more casual comic reader, I think for me, if I wanted to see a Batgirl film, I would just say, as long as the story is solid, the action is solid, and as long as they're not trying too hard to make Batgirl the next Batman, because we talked about, what's the Batman situation in the DCEU, or whatever universe this Batgirl film takes place in. As long as they're trying not to, too hard not to make her the next, Batman level character, and just have her be Barbara Gordon, have a good Barbara Gordon Batgirl story, I would be totally fine with that. I think that, whatever direction they decide to go in, as long as they make a good, solid film, I'm happy. And honestly, at this point, with DC, and Warner Brothers, obviously, with the whole business side of it being sold off and all that sort of stuff, it's kind of a huge debacle what to do with the DCEU. And they're just kind of chugging forward into the multiverse a little bit, but it feels less planned than it does for Marvel, where Marvel feels like we have a plan with the multiverse. I feel like for DC, it's more, we just don't really know what to do, and we're just going to chuck the multiverse and try to reset everything. And that's fine. It can work. It works in the comics with the resets and the New 52 and all that sort of stuff. But again, I've been rambling on and on about Batgirl for a while, so we will see exactly what they decide to do. But that is a great question, Star Wars Galactic. Thank you so much for writing in. And yeah, again, guys, if you guys want to make sure that you have a question for the podcast, a topic, then make sure to fill out the Google form, and we will get to that as well. But speaking of the DCEU, I think, and more on a positive note, that the next upcoming film in the DC Extended Universe is The Suicide Squad. And recently, I think today, I am, recording this on Thursday, July 15th, I believe. And today, the first Suicide Squad reactions came out. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because, we just kind of talked about how the DCU is kind of a mess, in my opinion, at least. And again, that's not to say, going back to that topic for just a quick second, not to say that I don't like a lot of the films. I love the first Wonder Woman. I thought it was great. I enjoyed, Justice League, the Whedon cut. You can call me a fake fan if you want. I don't care. I enjoyed it. And I also, again, documented on this channel, I really like the Snyder cut. I like Shazam. Thought, Birds of Prey was okay. I liked Aquaman. So, yeah, I didn't like Wonder Woman 1984. I didn't like Man of Steel. I didn't like Batman v Superman. Probably missing one over there, but that's all right. And so, but again, and Suicide Squad, obviously. And I thought Suicide Squad was not great, but regardless, the Suicide Squad is coming out, and it has very little to do with the first Suicide Squad, other than returning cast members like Viola Davis and Joel Kinnaman. But James Gunn is now directing a new film. It's coming out in just over, I think, 3 weeks. Pretty close, actually, and I'm very excited to see it. And we got our first reactions, and I wanted to go over a few of them and just kind of get a general consensus of how people are feeling about the Suicide Squad. And honestly, right off the bat, I think that it sounds excellent. And I think that that's to be expected at this point, because James Gunn has been very vocal about the fact that he has gotten to make the film that he always wanted to make with the Suicide Squad. Warner Brothers had very little interference with him, and I think that's awesome. So let's go over just a few reactions really quick. Let's see. This first one comes from Brandon Davis, comicbookmovie.com, who says, "The Suicide Squad is absolutely insane. Vicious as hell, raunchy, unforgiving. James Gunn is fully unleashed. It's sometimes overwhelming, but it has moments of heart, humor, action, motion, all of it. Relentless. There's nothing like it." And honestly, I think that basically sums up what we see in the trailers. A lot of the people, we'll go over a couple more reactions in a second, are saying that this film really does earn the R rating. It's violent, it's vicious, like Brandon Davis was saying. And I think, if James Gunn is going to go for it with a Suicide Squad film, then by all means. We see King Shark in one of the trailers ripping somebody in half. Like, that's pretty crazy. And, I think that James Gunn is not allowed to do that sort of stuff with Marvel, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, because I don't think Guardians of the Galaxy needs to be rated R, guys. Like, I think even if James Gunn was given the option to make a Guardians of the Galaxy film R-rated, other than maybe adding a few more F-bombs if he wanted to do that, I don't think it would even get an R rating, because that's just not what Guardians is. But it's clear that James Gunn also wanted to make a sort of R-rated comic book movie, and I'm very glad that he got to do that with the Suicide Squad. I'm very glad that he is getting the opportunities now to make the Peacemaker show because of, the rewarding his creative vision. Let's go to another one. This is from Steven Weintraub of Collider, who says, "Absolutely loved the Suicide Squad. The movie is super violent, extremely funny, and a huge home run for James Gunn and DC. Tons of surprises and things I wasn't expecting. Just a great movie," which is awesome. And I think, just going through really quickly a few more of these reactions, I won't read every single one. There's a bunch of them. But basically all of them are echoing the fact that this film is insane. It's just absolutely off the walls, it's just absolutely crazy what they were able to do with this film. It's unexpected, which I think was something that we were, ironically expecting this film to be unexpected, with James Gunn saying, be prepared. Most of the characters are going to die. Which is really interesting, by the way. Would Harley Quinn die? I'm not sure. I doubt it. But, you never know. If they gave James Gunn the complete creative freedom to do whatever he wanted, he might have done it. It's hard to say. I'm really curious to see what happens. And most of all, people are just saying that this film is fun. But not in the way that like a film to me, like maybe even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, to give a more apt example, that film is fun. It has, a lot of emotion at the very end with Yondu, but overall, I would just say that the film is fun. It's fine. It's really enjoyable. But this, a lot of the critics here are seeming to say and have the consensus of this film is fun, but it also is emotional. It has heart, it has humor, it has everything. And I think that that's what you really want to look for in a good comic book movie. I think, we'll talk about Black Widow right after this, but like a film, you'd want a film to be funny in certain places if it warrants it. Like a film like, Logan even has a good couple jokes in there. You want the film to have a heart, no matter what the film is, I think. And as in a film like The Suicide Squad, you just want it to be fun. And honestly, that's all I'm expecting. It's just to have an absolute blast watching The Suicide Squad. And I'm just really excited to see it. So, honestly, even though, James Gunn had that whole dramatic situation, and even though the first Suicide Squad film wasn't my favorite comic book film ever, I think this film looks fantastic. I have no idea how it connects to the DCU at all. And honestly, I don't think James Gunn cares, really. I don't think I care that much either. And I think that's fine. You have Marvel, you have DC. I think that's fine. So I'm really excited, and I would love to know if you guys are excited as well about the Suicide Squad, because I'm just, I'm so happy that we're getting comic book movie month after month after month. I think it literally is every month. We had Black Widow in July. July. We had what is it? Suicide Squad in August, Shang-Chi in September, I think Venom 2 in October, Eternals in November, Spider-Man December, and I think February is it picks back up with Thor, or I could be completely wrong. It could be something else. But anyways, I'm super excited about that. And so those are the first reactions to the Suicide Squad. Super great to hear. And now we've talked about 2 DC projects, and let's talk about the 2 Marvel projects that were all over the headlines this past week. So first of all, we are going to talk about Black Widow. And, I would love to have had CM on the show to give some in-depth thoughts on Black Widow and his thoughts and his perspective. As it is, though, he unfortunately was not able to make it. But I can tell you that he did really enjoy the film, and he echoes a lot of things that I'm about to say. I think that, I think we both very much enjoyed the film. Spoiler alert. And yes, this is going to be a full spoiler segment on Black Widow. And we're going to really, do a deep dive here for just a little bit. And then we're going to do a deep dive on Loki. So how is this different than my Black Widow review, which you can check out on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, is that this isn't really going to be me critiquing the pacing or the action or the visuals. And it's more of just going to be me talking about my overall feelings about the film, why I think it's good, why I enjoyed it, and what I think it means for the MCU, and all this sort of stuff. We're going to talk about all of that in depth. So just on an overall feeling basis, because at the end of the day, you can say, for example, I can say that the film Captain America: The First Avenger, I know, unpopular opinion, it's not my favorite MCU film, even though it has great visuals, pretty good acting, great music, and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, what is your feeling? How do you feel when you walk out of the theater? And, I went into the theater for the first time since Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker over a year and a half ago. And it was just great. It really felt great. And from the second the movie started, I just felt the difference. I've seen some films that came out, like Mulan, for example, on my TV screen, and it just wasn't the same. It just wasn't that same experience that you get in a movie theater where the sound is blasting all around you. I happened to go to a really nice theater that had, really nice chairs and great sound speakers and a huge screen. And obviously seeing the Marvel logo on a big screen and not a small screen that we've been seeing for the past 6 months, it was just a fantastic thing to see. And here's what I'll say. I've seen a lot of people saying that, Black Widow, I won't say a lot of people, because I'm not trying to call out anybody at all. I think that this comment was very apt in the fact that it pointed out something. And that is that on my Black Widow review, I called it the best MCU solo film in years. And I believe that. I believe that this is the best MCU solo film since Black Panther, which was, I think, 3 years ago. I don't think it's better than Captain Marvel. And I'm talking about like intro solo films. Like Spider-Man Far From Home is, it's a solo film. but I'm talking about like the Captain Marvels, the Thors, the Iron Mans, and all that sort of stuff. So I think, Captain Marvel, not as good. I think, Black Panther, obviously like Black Panther was the last one, but I really do think that it ranks up there with the solo films. I think it's better than Iron Man. I think it's better than Captain America: The First Avenger. I think it's better than Thor. I think it's better than Ant-Man. I really did enjoy this movie. And it was a great time to me. But I understand, right? Like we talk a lot about how film reaches us differently and how it's art. And because it's art, obviously different people are going to see it in different ways. And that's totally fine. That is completely okay. And I have this saying of, I always say this about people who talk about my opinions on things, is I don't care, what you think about my opinions, because they are my opinions. I more so care about why you think the way that you think about my opinions, because that's more constructive for me. And that allows me to see what you're thinking about, and we can have a discussion about that. All that aside, I got a comment on the Black Widow review that came out, and it was from a very well-meaning subscriber, commenter, or whoever it was, and they just said simply that, you have me intrigued because people, I think the quote, I'm trying my best not to misquote, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe the exact quote is, people are slamming this movie. And I sat back and I thought about that for a second, and what I replied was, and I believe this is true, is that we live in two very different spaces, maybe three different spaces. One being the YouTube space of movie, let's say criticism or fandom or punditry. That's, the YouTube space is one. Then we have the critic space, right? Where I'm not saying that, like, for example, a Jeremy Jahns is not a legitimate critic. He is, of course. But I'm saying that the more traditional critics, the ones who write for newspapers and websites and things like that. So there's those people. And then we have the rest of them, which is the general audience, right? Like everybody else who is going to see this movie who really doesn't care about pacing and just wants to have a good time in a movie. And I made a video about this, about you're watching movies wrong, that video essay that talks about how we should all sort of embody that a little bit more in our lives, about how most people watching this YouTube channel are very quick to criticize things, which is totally fine because we are, big fans of the criticism part of movie critiques and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's important that we just enjoy what's in front of us. And if we don't like it, we'll talk about stuff that people like that I don't like in a bit. But if we don't like it, that's totally fine. And I think that it's important for us in the YouTube space to realize that we are not the only audience out there. And I don't think that this commenter meant anything by it. I totally don't think that, I'm not trying to call out this person at all. I think it was a very, very well said and well put comment. So just putting that out there. But I think for me, in reading that comment, I realized, because I had watched a couple reviews of Black Widow before the film came out, and namely, we all look at the Chris Stuckmans, the Jeremy Jahns, right? They're the two biggest movie critics on YouTube. And they both thought the movie wasn't good. And you know what? That's totally fine, right? Like, if Chris Stuckman thinks that this movie is just C-level Marvel and it's boring and it shouldn't have been made and whatever, I'm trying not to put words in people's mouth. That's not exactly what he said. You go watch his review. I'm not trying to, put words in anyone's mouth. And Jeremy Jahns thinks, I don't like this movie either. That's totally fine. That is 100% fine. But then what I noticed was that a lot of people went on YouTube to make their own videos. I looked up some reviews just to see, and, seemed to kind of jump on that bandwagon. And again, if you don't like Black Widow, you legitimately don't like Black Widow, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think anybody ever should invalidate that. But I do think that there is this odd perception, just because a lot of the big critics on YouTube said that they don't like the movie, that all of a sudden nobody likes this movie. And it's really interesting to me because, and I replied to this comment with this, the film has an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is certified fresh, which is better than, I think, about half of the MCU movies, honestly. It has an 80%. I think it's pretty high in the audience score as well. I can't be, I'm not 100% sure. This movie is making money, obviously. It's a Marvel movie. It got an A- cinema score. This film is generally liked by people. And I think that that's important to keep in mind here. Again, if you're one of those people who don't like this movie, totally fine. Feel free to comment down below in the YouTube video and let me know why. But I happen to be one of those people who really enjoyed the film. And I think it's important to talk about this because, it's important not to let other people's perceptions of things ruin your experience. And so I'll give you another example about my experience with Black Widow, is Taskmaster. I try my best before a movie. For those of you guys who don't know my personal philosophy when it comes to marketing and things like that, because I really hate spoilers. I used to kind of not care that much, and then I realized that watching certain MCU movies with spoilers, like with Iron Man 3, I think I knew the twist going in, and obviously, I made my own opinions about it, but it wasn't as interesting, at least. And ever since then, I really try my best to avoid spoilers. And the thing is, for me, is I only watch the main trailers. I don't watch TV spots because why? We're not the target audience of TV spots anyways. We're going to see the movie. And I try to avoid as many reviews as I possibly can because I want to form my own opinion about the movie. But I do read, reactions and things like that. And a lot of the reactions, the first reactions of the movie were very positive, but a lot of them had said that Taskmaster was very disappointing to them. And we'll talk a lot about Taskmaster on this segment because I think it's important. And I think it's important to understand why people don't like Taskmaster. And a lot of people said that Taskmaster was disappointing and that, it was easily the weakest part of the film. And some people even said it was like Trevor Slattery in Iron Man 3. And I went into Black Widow almost worried about the Taskmaster twist. So up until they reveal who Taskmaster is, I was like, oh yeah, I'm enjoying this movie. I'm having a great time. But this nagging doubt in the back of my head of once they reveal Taskmaster, this movie's going to be ruined. And then, and I'm gonna mispronounce this name, Olga Kurylenko, I think is her name. She pulls off the helmet. It's Dreykov's daughter. And I just sat there and I went, I don't get it. Because I thought that was perfectly fine. Now, we are going to talk about why, because I think this is important. Why are people, in general, not happy with Taskmaster in this film? I think there's one... There are a few groups of people out there about the Taskmaster thing, and I think it's important that we break a couple of them down. The first of which being the comic book fans, which is, by the way, we are ingrained in the whole comic book lore and legacy and all that sort of stuff, but a vast majority of the people don't read comics, so they don't know what's going on in terms of Kang, in terms of Taskmaster, Tony Masters, or whatever. And I think that that's really important to understand. But the comic book fans, in general, have said that Tony Masters was, should have been the villain, that it should have been a real photographic memory or photographic reflex person, and that this is disappointing because she's basically an android. And what I say to that is, maybe, but also you don't know that. They could have made Tony Masters in this movie, and it could have been atrocious, for all you know. And I don't quite understand why people think that just having Tony Masters in the film instead of, I forget her name exactly, Antonia Dreykov, it would be better. It could have been even worse, to be quite honest with you. And I'm not saying it would have been worse. And I think, people point to the Mandarin example, and people have said, so do you think that because people are mad about Taskmaster, which again, I don't think is true. I think that's really mostly in the YouTube community, not really in most other places. But people have said, because Taskmaster was disappointing, do you think that they're going to do a Mandarin sort of thing where they're going to bring in the real Tony Masters later on? And I don't think so. I mean, everything's possible, but no, I don't think so. And the reason is because, if they pulled off the Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3, and it was good in most people's eyes, like it was satisfying in and of itself, I don't think we would be in this situation, really. The fact of the matter is that they picked, it wasn't just that it was Trevor Slattery, it was that Aldrich Killian said, I am the Mandarin, and then blew up. And obviously the Mandarin is, it's an Asian character, and you had a white person just yelling, I am the Mandarin, all of a sudden, and also like a British guy pretending to be the Mandarin. And look, I think that they wanted to do the Mandarin right. Like, they wanted to right a wrong. I don't think there's any right to wrong here with Taskmaster. I understand if you're disappointed, if you're a fan of Taskmaster in the comic book, because, it's a cool character, Tony Masters. The idea of having photographic reflexes is really cool. At the same time, I also think that what they did in the movie made narrative sense. So, there are there's that group of people who think it just wasn't the comics and it's not good, and I don't buy that at all. There's another group of people who just think it was a disappointing villain, and I understand that. Look, if you think that Taskmaster and Dreykov were not the best villains, and they weren't my favorites either, that's absolutely fine. That is absolutely fine. I would also say, though, that Marvel has a history of not making great villains anyways. So it's not like this is anything new, and it's not like it ruins the Black Widow movie. Like, for example, Guardians of the Galaxy, I think Ronan the Accuser is awful. I think he's atrocious. I still think that movie is near the top 10, top 12 of the MCU, for sure. And I don't think that detracts from that movie just being what it is, because that movie is not a Ronan movie. It's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. If they butchered Thanos, however, in Infinity War, we have a different story, because Thanos basically is the central character of Infinity War. As it stands, Taskmaster was barely in the film anyways, which can be a source of disappointment on its own. I know it is for me. I would have liked to see more action from Taskmaster, sure. But if it services the story, then, what can I really say? I thought what they gave us was good. And, the best example that I've been able to give to other people who have seen MCU films is Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think that Taskmaster is very, very comparable to Ghost in Ant-Man, how I felt about Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp. They weren't the big villains of the movie. And honestly, there were no big villains of those movies. You had Ghost and you had Sonny Birch. You had Taskmaster and you had Dreykov. At the end of the day, they didn't have much personality. They might have had a little bit of a backstory development for them. And then they survived the film and are hopefully coming back. And I think that's a good thing. I think that there are a lot of things about those characters that would lend themselves to better development in the future. So I'm not worried. And for all of those people, by the way, who are saying, for Loki, we'll get to Loki in a bit, but, they didn't, give this person development because season 2. Well, I would argue that Taskmaster, you haven't probably seen the last of that character yet. So, we want to take things for what they are. But I'm also saying to be consistent, right? We don't want to just say, oh, well, there's going to be a sequel, so, Black Widow doesn't have to be good. That's not what I'm saying. Which, by the way, I don't know if there's going to be a Black Widow sequel. We can talk about that in a second, too. But I think that it makes more sense to me that Taskmaster would return along with Red Guardian, along with Melina and Yelena. And so that's what I wanted to really touch on Taskmaster, because I understand the people who legitimately have a gripe with the character, but I also think that there is something to be said about the fact that Antonia Dreykov, I think, made a lot of sense in the movie. And I think that, I think it's just important to keep an open mind, is all. But speaking of things that worked in the movie, I mean, we got to talk about Yelena Belova. And what her future in the MCU is, because I also think that we should dedicate a good portion of this segment to the future of the MCU, as it seems to be very important. We'll talk about with Loki in a bit. First of all, I think Florence Pugh was awesome, as everybody else said. I don't have anything new to add to that. Although, I do think that this MCU movie, I don't know if I was looking for it to be funny, in any particular way, but I found myself in the first little bit, I found the jokes to be a little flat, and it's not like they were cringy. Like, I think some of the jokes in the MCU can be a little cringy. Like, Age of Ultron toes the line. It's some of the jokes are like the omelet one that Iron Man says to Ultron. It doesn't fit there. I don't think Black Widow is that bad in terms of MCU humor. But I also found myself consistently going like, oh, there's a joke. Oh, I didn't laugh. And the first time I legitimately laughed out loud in the film was the whole poser thing with Yelena. That was awesome. And then Red Guardian comes in and he's pretty awesome too. So there is that. But again, Yelena is the one given a lot of those jokes. But what the difference is between a cringy joke and what Yelena was doing is that while I didn't laugh at a lot of Yelena's lines and a lot of Yelena's jokes that were, I think, meant to be funny, I also appreciated that it added to her character, her deadpan sarcasm, her, I like, this would be a fun way to die sort of attitude. And I thought that was great. I really enjoyed the character, and I really love the family dynamic. I don't think I'm adding anything new to the conversation here, but I do want to say that because I think that it's important to just, to point out that, like the Suicide Squad reactions were saying, this film has a heart. And that even though buildings are falling from the sky, or I guess a floating Russian base is falling from the sky, that what makes this movie work as well as it does to me is that it has a heart. It works. And I think that people are saying Natasha was overshadowed, and I just think that, look, Yelena might have been the standout, or Red Guardian might have been the standout, but this was a Black Widow movie. And I think that that's important to realize. In terms of where I think these characters go from here. So obviously Yelena is being set up to be a big part of the MCU. Whatever kind of team Val is setting up with the Thunderbolts, I would suspect, because she makes a joke about I want to raise, and I would suspect that she's working for Thunderbolt Ross, and we saw some hints to Red Hulk, I think, in Black Widow with him. The second, I think, triple bypass, and also he's holding a cane. And I think that it's going to be clearly the Thunderbolts. So whether Yelena turns out to be a true hero or more of an anti-hero, because I don't know if it's fair to lump her in that same category as John Walker, who is also the only other recruit on this team so far. But then again, maybe that's kind of what it is. And I think that if you have like a Captain America 4, if you fight the Thunderbolts, that might be a really interesting concept, right? Sam Wilson against the Thunderbolts, or an Avengers film. We'll talk about the different ways the MCU can go with Loki in just a little bit. But again, I think that it's a really cool thing to do with the character of now she's in present day. She's kind of more of her own person, and now she's being hired by Val. And Val is saying, look, this guy, again, how does she know about Vormir? I don't know. But this guy, Hawkeye, Clint Barton, who your sister was close to, basically betrayed her, is what she was implying. Go kill him. And I think that really did an effective job of making us more excited for the Hawkeye series. Because I personally was kind of like, yeah, I'll watch it. I'll enjoy it probably. But now I'm so excited for the Hawkeye series, I think. If Yelena is going to be a big part of it, which is not even, confirmed. If Hawkeye's like 8 episodes, I think, or 6 episodes, if Yelena's in like half of one, that's, that could be that. And so we don't want to raise our expectations too high. And the last thing I'll talk about with Black Widow is with Red Guardian and Melina. I think that those two characters are interesting because it's almost like, and I keep alluding to Loki, and we'll sort of do a wrap up with all of this at the end of the Loki segment of where is the MCU going from here. And I'll talk about my thoughts on a Young Avengers and a New Avengers and a Dark Avengers and all that sort of stuff. But we'll just talk about Black Widow right now. I think that Red Guardian and Melina are going to be relegated to the Black Widow franchise. And I think that's a good thing. I don't need Red Guardian to appear in Thor Love and Thunder. I don't need Melina Vostokov, even as Iron Maiden, to appear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I would be totally fine if they just picked up this storyline in present day in Black Widow 2 starring Florence Pugh. Honestly. So whatever direction they decide to go, one of the things to wrap up the Black Widow part of this podcast that I enjoyed the most was that it was standalone. Was that this film, while fitting in to the MCU, didn't bash you over the head with, I just came back from Civil War at the airport, oh, good for me. It really was a Natasha self-contained story. And I miss that. Honestly, I do. I just miss when the MCU can tell a good story, and I think that's what I'm so looking forward to the Suicide Squad. It's fun to, to have things set up other things in the MCU, but also we lose sight of the fact that these are also just stories that are being told. And the primary focus of entertainment is to just entertain and tell a good story. And I think, the next thing we'll talk about failed to do so. But I think Black Widow, one of the reasons that I liked it so much was that it just told its own self-contained story. And I really like that. And so, yeah, if you guys have seen my review, you guys can go check that out. I don't go as in depth as I did in this podcast to that in the review. But again, I just wanted to talk more about Black Widow, and I really enjoyed it. Now, let's talk about the other big MCU thing, and that's Loki. So, look, if you guys have seen my episode 6 review video, you guys know that I'm very conflicted about this show. And this is the first time that I felt like this about any MCU product. And the reason is this. It's because, with movies, it's hard in a movie to be that inconsistent unless you're like a product of just chopping room floor stuff and like editing and like, for example, the first Suicide Squad was very uneven and inconsistent. But in general, when you're watching a 2-hour film, it has a consistency from beginning to end. It has one or two or, one team of writers. It has one set of directors, same actors, same characters, and it's one plot. And so the 24 previously released MCU movies, I felt at the very least are consistent. I mean, I think The Incredible Hulk is consistently boring, but it's still consistently The Incredible Hulk. With these MCU shows thus far, I think WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier have been pretty consistent as well. I think WandaVision kind of derailed itself a little bit at the end, but not too much, right? And Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I think all the way through, was very consistent. And I thought that was good. Here, the thing about Loki is, to me, the varying levels of quality of this show are jarring. And this is the first time that I felt like almost every single episode of Loki was written by a different person. And I'm sure that most of WandaVision's episodes were written by different people, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier's episode were written by different people. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm saying that with Loki, I looked up after the first few episodes, like who's writing these episodes, and sure enough, it's a different person each time. And you can tell. It's like 6 little pockets of writing that are just so varying in quality to me. And it's frustrating because I don't know how to look at this show holistically anymore. I don't. Just to give you a little bit of a brief recap, I loved episodes 1 and 2. I thought they were fantastic. I didn't hate is a strong word. I didn't hate episode 3. I just thought it was completely useless, I thought there were better ways to develop the Sylvie-Loki relationship. Well, they went from point A to point B in episodes 1 and 2, and then basically Loki and Sylvie went from point B to point negative A and had to go all the way back to point A, and now they're like behind again. It was just frustrating to me. And then in episode 4, they ramped up the gear again, and I thought episode 4 was fantastic. And then episode 5 kind of stalled a little bit again. And it was a little confusing to me. I was like, okay, sure, setting up a finale, great. And then the finale just kind of abruptly ended. And it's just, it felt a little disappointing to me. And now we're gonna address a few things here in this segment of the podcast about Loki, but I will say this up front. A lot of my feelings about this show are very subjective and personal. And if you enjoyed those things, which I know a lot of people did, for the life of me, I don't understand. I don't understand. But fine, and that's totally great. But as long as we can all respect each other's opinions, then I don't think we have a problem at all. So, look, with Kang, and I know this is not probably the big bad version of Kang. I know on paper this is the insane Immortus version that just went crazy after millennia of sitting there. I get that. People have been saying to me, oh, but, can't you tell, like, well, hey, he's insane. That's why he's acting like that. I never had a question in my mind of why he was acting the way he was. It's just that I didn't like it. That's it. I thought he was corny. I thought he was cringy. I thought he was some weird mixture of the Joker, both Jared Leto and some Heath Ledger in there, not in a good way, and even Jeff Goldblum, I just, it was this weird amalgamation of performances and eccentricity that just didn't work for me. And so there's one thing, right? You hinge 1/6 of your show, because all of episode 6 was about Kang. You hinge 1/6 of your show on Kang, which I didn't like, and I didn't love the finale. That is what it is. And I am dearly hoping that we get, a more menacing version of Kang in the future. I have no doubt we will. But again, it's something that adds to my sort of nervousness about the next time we see Kang. Because if an Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania trailer comes out and it's this same version of Kang, I'm gonna obviously watch everything, but I'm not gonna be as excited as I could be, So there's that. So they hinged the show on Kang at the end. Okay, fine. Another thing they hinged the show on is the relationship between Loki and Sylvie. And, while I am warming up to the Sylvie character a little bit, I still don't love the character even on her own. And to have her be this crux of Tom Hiddleston's Loki's character it was a little bit of a stretch to me. It just didn't work, and if you're hinging like half your show on that, well, then obviously I'm not going to enjoy that half of the show, really. And luckily, episodes 1, 2, and 4 were not really about that relationship at all. And that's fine. It was good. Episode 4 a little bit, but, they weren't together that much in that episode until the end. And that, not coincidentally, I think, was the part of the show that I liked the most. And then at the end of the day, what this show... Because here's the thing about this show. The showrunners and the show writers and the head writer, Michael Waldron, was saying that this is ultimately, and the director, Kate Herron, I believe, or Harlan or something like that. I apologize. I don't remember her last name. But the show, the people in charge of the show were saying this is a show about Loki's identity. And Loki finding out who he really is. And I think that they did a very effective job of that overall. From the beginning, you have this arrogant, brash, narcissistic version of Loki from the Avengers. And he goes on a journey of self-discovery. I think that is totally great. I think that's one of the best parts of the show, to be quite honest with you. But then, I think at the very end, they sort of forgot that was their mission and got so wrapped up in introducing the multiverse. Because here's the thing. I think there's a difference between character growth and a character arc. I think that we saw tremendous character growth from this version of Loki, but I don't think we saw a satisfying character arc, because at the end of the day, when Sylvie and Loki kiss, which, it wasn't Rise of Skywalker bad, but it wasn't good either. And then Sylvie kicks him out, and he's left alone, and now Mobius doesn't even recognize him. I asked myself the question of, what has this Loki learned throughout his experiences? He's learned to not be as narcissistic, and that's good. But at the end of the day, the lesson that this show is trying to tell Loki is that no matter how hard you try to not be bad and to be, as not narcissistic as possible, the world hates you. And you just can't have nice things. And you're alone. And look, that's a great, I think, villain origin story, if not for the fact that we have seen Loki be a villain for some 5 years before he converted to a hero in Ragnarok and Infinity War. So if we want Loki to be a villain again, I guess he can turn bitter all over again and say, I really am alone, and where's Mobius, and all that sort of stuff. And that, again, that was just a little disappointing to me. I don't dislike a lack of closure necessarily. I dislike a lack of closure when it doesn't feel like it's warranted. Someone I was talking to me about The Empire Strikes Back and how this sort of felt like it. And I thought, yeah, in a way, right? The Empire Strikes Back was very open-ended at the very end. But also it felt like there was like this tangible plot thread of like, Luke did have the confrontation with his father and he lost because of his own arrogance, because of the things that he did, because of his pitfalls, he lost. And this show feels more like Loki, in spite of all of his goodness in this series, is still a loser. And maybe that's just me. It very well might just be me, but again, it's just something that didn't quite sit well with me, So, look, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about the future of the MCU in the next segment, in the final segment, but at the end of the day, I think WandaVision is by far and away the best show of Phase 4 so far. And that's disappointing to me because after episodes 1 and 2, you guys can you'll go back and watch my videos. I said that if Loki continued on this pace, it was going to easily be my favorite show. Not only that, it was going to crack my top 5. And it was. If it continued on that episode 1 to 2 pace, it was going to crack my top 5 somehow. Top 6 maybe. And at the end of the day, WandaVision had a clear story. Yes, it botched the finale a little bit. It was just, mindless action, although the visions were great. But Agatha was a disappointment. Fine. You know what? Guardians of the Galaxy is a horrible villain to me. And I think that movie is top 10-ish. And maybe it might be 11 or 12. I don't quite remember off the top of my head. What other movies are there that are... I mean, if you'll notice in my top 10 of my MCU, that usually the villains are really good. Like Thor Ragnarok, though, is in the top 10. And I don't think Hela is a great villain. That's okay. I don't think Taskmaster is a great villain, but I think Black Widow is easily in the upper half of the MCU. So, you botch Kang, and it's fine. That's not what defines an MCU project to me. But at the end of the day, anyways, that WandaVision had a consistency to it. And at the end of the show, when they were closing out, it ended... they had a little bit of an epilogue with Wanda coming back out of the Hex and all that sort of stuff, but the ending scene, the true ending of the show was, we have said goodbye before, so it stands to reason that we'll say hello again. So long, darling. That was the end of the show. And, it felt right. It felt resonant. It felt like it was good. It was a good ending. Even though Wanda had done so many bad things, it felt like the show had found its closure. Not resolution necessarily, because obviously there's not much resolution for Wanda, who's going on the run now, but closure, right? Like Civil War, Captain America Civil War. Steve beats up Iron Man and his friends are in prison, but there was still closure. Not necessarily resolution, but closure. This Loki show just felt like it was setting up other stuff. And for everyone saying that Loki Season 2 is going to pick up with all these storylines about Ravonna Renslayer, and it very well might do that. I also think that with this interconnectedness of the MCU, this is one of the disadvantages of that. If it's to be believed, The Hollywood Reporter, Loki is appearing in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which means that a bunch of stuff is going to happen to Loki in between the ending of Loki Season 1 and Loki Season 2. It's not like, for an example, if you haven't seen the Umbrella Academy, a little bit of a spoiler, I won't say exactly what it is, but the end of Season 2 of the Umbrella Academy ends on a gigantic cliffhanger, right? Like, it's just an enormous cliffhanger. And so I expect in the Umbrella Academy Season 3 that the show picks up on that. Right? I can't expect that from Loki because I don't know what's going to happen in between Season 1 and Season 2. And to me, that's not necessarily an exciting thing because I want to pick up right where we left off. Okay, you don't give me resolution on Ravonna, and now you have a different Mobius and a different B-15, and Loki's lost, and Sylvie's at the Citadel, and now the Kangs are coming. I want a Season 2 that's standing alone with Season 1. Where you explore Ravonna, where you explore Mobius on his jet ski, where you explore a different evil Kang can be the villain of the whole Season 2. As it stands, it just doesn't look like that's what's going to happen. So, me personally, I find myself not being able to be excited about Season 2 yet. Once we kind of see, what they're going to do, then we'll kind of figure out. And the other thing I'll say about this is that Kevin Feige, said that Loki was going to be a thriller, like a crime thriller, like a law and order procedural kind of a thing. And the first few episodes were, and those were the best parts of the show. But the last 4 weren't. So, whatever the trailer for Loki Season 2 and whatever the concept is, whether it's like a buddy cop movie or if it's a space adventure or whatever, I just don't know what to expect because I'm always going to be worried that at the end of the day, it's just going to be setting up the next movie. That's all. So again, my overall thoughts on Loki, wildly inconsistent. The best parts of the show far outweigh maybe not far away, but pretty significantly outweigh the negatives. The positives do. And I would still think WandaVision is a better show, but I think that it's better than Falcon and Winter Soldier because the highs are so much higher than the highs of the Falcon and Winter Soldier. And those are my thoughts on Loki. Look, I'm excited for season 2. Little nervous. Very nervous for him in Doctor Strange with the Multiverse of Madness. I hope they don't just kind of shoehorn him in there for a little cameo about like, what's going on? The TVA is broken, and then Doctor Strange fixes everything. And we'll see. The next show up is What If. We'll see if that has any canonical ramifications. If not, the next canon show is is Hawkeye, presumably, or maybe Miss Marvel. I think it's Hawkeye though. And we'll just move on from there. I didn't like Loki that much as I thought I would, and that's totally fine. But to close out the podcast today, I wanted to talk about what I think the future of the MCU is moving forward. Because here's the thing. Once you open up the multiverse, right, it's hard to go back. And what I mean by that is, once everything is interconnected, right, it's hard for the MCU to just say, oh, but, the multiverse is open, but Shang-Chi is completely unaffected. Or, Thor Love and Thunder is completely unaffected. Because I don't know, Taika Waititi saying that he got to make the film that he always wanted to make in Thor Love and Thunder, which is great. And I don't think the multiverse was part of that plan. So I can't imagine Kevin Feige going up to him and saying, hey, but, your film has to have the multiverse in it, right? And he's, So it's a very interesting dilemma of having certain films deal with this multiversal ramification, clearly being Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Probably Ant-Man and the Wasp, because it has Kang. But then you have a show like Hawkeye, where I don't want the multiverse to make any appearance, because that would just be terrible, right? Like, imagine if Black Widow came out. And imagine if Black Widow, if Black Widow had just had a random multiversal thing where, I don't know, her real parents came out of nowhere, out of a portal, and were like, hey, Natasha, and it just wouldn't have made sense. However, and this is just me completely speculating, I do think there is a solution to this. And I'm not sure if this is what Marvel wants to do, but this is just my guess at this point. I think Marvel is clearly setting up different quadrants of the MCU. You have the more fantastical parts of the MCU. I think Wanda Maximoff is slowly heading in that direction. I think Doctor Strange is obviously there. You have, You have Loki. You have maybe not Thor Love. We'll talk about the other segments, but you have the clearly more zany, weird, cosmic parts of the MCU. And I think that that's going to be its own segment. I think you have the Earthbound stuff, which I am really enjoying. The Black Widows, the Falcon and the Winter Soldiers, the Hawkeyes, And obviously you can have things cross over here and there, like Spider-Man No Way Home, but generally things are going to stay in their own lanes, for sure. And then you have the sort of more, and it's so weird for me to say this, but the more grounded space adventures, right? Like your Guardians of the Galaxy, which probably shouldn't have anything to do with the multiverse. Your Thor Love and Thunders, which probably shouldn't have anything to do with the multiverse. And I think that, Marvel is trying to now separate things into their own quadrants to give different segments of the fandom different things to enjoy. And I think that's a very smart thing to do. How are they going to achieve that? My guess would be that somehow at the end of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, right? Which, by the way, was supposed to be out right after Loki, I think. So, it would have been a very natural tie-in for Tom Hiddleston's Loki to be in Doctor Strange 2. But anyways, I think that somehow the multiverse will get split off. Like, there will be different universes dealing with different things, and somehow the Black Widows and the Sam Wilsons and the Yelena Belovas, the Hawkeyes will end up in one universe dealing with their own things. Spider-Man will end up in his own universe dealing with Venom things. Guardians of the Galaxy will end up in their own universe dealing with different things. And I think at the end of the day, what would make a lot of sense then is for Kang obviously to start creeping back in, and also for then the Avengers level film to be all of the universes colliding at some point, right? I think that makes the most sense. Where they go after the multiverse, I have no idea. Like, after the multiverse, I honestly think it might be time for a reboot. I'm not sure about that, but honestly, after the whole multiverse saga, phases 4, 5, 6, however long they want to do it, I think it might be time for the MCU to reboot, and I would be totally happy with that. I would. So yeah, I think that in order to have a team like the Dark Avengers operating in the same universe as the multiverse with Kang the Conqueror, you just can't really, you can't really do that unless you sort of splinter them off in their own segments. And I think that would be the smartest thing for Marvel to do. Unlike Thanos, right? You can have the Avengers on Earth, but Thanos was all the way on the other side of the galaxy, and then you had crossover heroes like Thor, where he met both, or like the Guardians of the Galaxy. But with the multiverse, you can't just say, oh, but the people on Earth aren't really noticing. It's not a big deal. It just doesn't make sense. And so it's part of the problem of Marvel getting bigger and bigger is that they have to account for these things as well. And I'm sure they will be able to. And I just hope at the end of the day that they can keep in mind that, their job is to tell stories, not to set up next films and be part of a universe. It's to tell good stories. And I think that as long as we can remember that, because I don't think Loki did a good job of that, then I think the MCU will be just fine. I think they will be absolutely fine. And that, guys, is the end of this episode 5 of Access Blockbusters Pod. So again, just a couple reminders. First of all, thank you for listening if you've listened all the way through. Hopefully this is just a nice thing to have in your ear while you're doing something else, just talking about movies and stuff. And again, if you want to participate in the Access Blockbusters Pod, please be sure to fill out the Google form. You can enter a topic, you can enter a Q&A. It's the best way because I don't have a consistent enough schedule to do streams and stuff, so I can't interact with you guys in that capacity. I might experiment with a Discord server, maybe. We'll see. But for now, the best way for you guys to interact with me is in the comments. I respond to every single one. Thank you guys so much. I try to at least. And fill out the Google form, and you'll probably be in the next episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to check us out on Spotify, maybe Apple Podcasts if we're there. And this video will obviously be on YouTube. And again, if you guys, want to listen to only one part of the show, ABP Clips going to be on YouTube as well. Stay tuned for that. And as always, guys, thank you so much for listening. It has been a blast, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.